Chapter 8, Examining Causal Relationships Among Your Variables. Introduction to Experimental Design. When the singer Adele won 6 Grammy Awards in 2012, the Wall Street Journal and National Public Radio ran stories about why many people seem to have a strong emotional reaction to her music and her song Someone Like You in particular. One theory is that the song includes a type of note called an appoggiatura, which begins as discordant with the melody but then changes to align with the melody. The discordance is unexpected and is believed to cause tension to the listener, which is then released when the note changes to match the melody. This tension and release is theorized to cause an emotional response, including chills running up the spine and possibly even crying. As researchers, how might we test if Adele's song causes an emotional reaction and that the presence of the appoggiatura is the causative factor? In this chapter, you will learn the key components necessary to test cause and effect, how to design an experiment, how to manipulate an independent variable, how to measure the dependent variable, how to balance internal and external validity in an experiment, and the limitations to experimental designs.
Good afternoon. Today we'll discuss about Chapter 8, Examining Causal Relationships Among Your Variables. So first, let us define what is cause and effect. A cause-effect relationship is a relationship in which one event or the cause makes another event happen, the effect. For instance, when you woke up today, in all likelihood, you were probably woken up by the sound of an alarm clock. The loud sound of the alarm was the cause. Without the alarm, you probably would have overslept. In this scenario, the alarm had the effect of you waking up at a certain time. This is what we mean by cause and effect. One cause can have several effects. For example, let's say you were conducting an experiment using regular high school students with no athletic ability. The purpose of our experiment is to see if becoming an all-star athlete would increase their attractiveness and popularity ratings among other high school students. Suppose that your results showed that not only did the students view the all-star athletes as more attractive and popular, but the self-confidence of the athletes also improved. Here we see that one cause, or having the status of an all-star athlete, has two effects. The first one is increased in their self-confidence, and the second one is higher attractiveness ratings among other students. Moving on, we have the requirements for causality. First is the correlation or covariance. There must be a relationship between variable A and variable B. If there is a causal relationship between two variables, there is also a correlational relationship. In other words, a change in one of the variables corresponds with the changes in the other. For example, in Adele's song Someone Like You, if a musical note can cause an emotional response, then we would find a significant correlation between songs that have these musical notes and listeners' reports of distinct emotions. The Clef, the author of the Wall Street Journal article about Adele's song, cites such a study conducted by psychologist John Sloboda in the 1990s. Participants identified song passages to which they had a strong reaction, and it turned out that the majority of the passages contained the appoggiatura note. However, finding a correlation between two variables is not enough to demonstrate the changes in one of the variables caused the changes in the other. Correlation is one requirement of causation, but alone it is insufficient. Next would be the sequence or temporal order. The change in variable A must come before the change in variable B. Another requirement of causation is sequencing. If you want to demonstrate the changes in one variable, which we will call variable A, cause changes in another variable, variable B, then the changes in variable A must occur before the changes in variable B. If you want to demonstrate that the musical note makes people have chills or cry, then exposure to the note must occur prior to any emotional response. But even with both correlation and sequencing, we do not have sufficient evidence that one variable caused a change in another. is ruling out alternative explanations. The researcher controlled for possible confounds so that variable A must be the only factor that could have caused the change in variable B. The final requirement of causation is ruling out alternative explanations for why the change in variable B both corresponded with and came after the changes in variable A. It may just be a coincidence, or the change may be due to some other variable that the researcher had not tested. Although people may report feeling emotional after listening to Adele's song Someone Like You, could it be due to a reason other than the presence of a specific type of a musical note? The co-writer of Someone Like You gave such an alternative explanation. He suggested that the lyrics paint a vivid picture, allowing listeners to imagine the experiences portrayed in the song. Another explanation is that there may be differences in the people who choose to listen to that song, and those individual differences may be causing the reaction rather than the notes or the lyrics. Next, we have threats to internal validity, confounds that must be controlled so that a cause-effect relationship can be demonstrated. Campbell and Stanley identified 8 confounds that are key threats to internal validity. Gleiner and Morgan divided these into 2 categories, based on whether the threats was due to experiences or environmental factors, or if the threat was due to participant characteristics. First, we'll discuss the threats to internal validity due to experiences or environmental factors. Number 1 is history. Any event or environmental condition other than variable A caused the change in variable B. Number 2, we have maturation. The change in variable B was due to natural changes that occur over time. 3, we have testing. When we observed changes in variable B were due to previous exposure to a test. And last, number 4, instrumentation. Observed changes in variable B were due to inconsistency in the measurement instrument, administrators, or scorers. Moving on, we will discuss the threats to internal validity due to participant characteristics. Number 1, statistical regression. Observed changes in variable B were due to a statistical phenomenon in which very high or low scores will regress to the mean, meaning that extreme scores will get less extreme over time. 2, we have attrition or mortality. The change in variable B was due to participants withdrawing from the study. Number 3 is selection. When comparing groups, the change in variable B was due to pre-existing differences. And number 4, selection interactions, meaning that the change in variable B was due to an interaction between the pre-existing differences and another threat to internal validity.
Design an experiment to test if using a mobile device while walking can cause accidents. First, we will need to identify on the experiment what is our independent variable and our dependent variable. The independent variable has a lot of terms. It's the treatment, it's the intervention, it's the variable that manipulate, but to simplify it, the independent variable will be labeled as cause, which is using a mobile device while walking, and our dependent variable is the effect, which is cause accidents. In this experiment, we want to know if using a mobile device while walking can cause accidents. When we do a study, we have to break down our variables in a way that we can measure them and collect data, and we call this operational definition. For example, walking while talking or texting. Over the course of the week, and we will record any difficulties they have, including being honked at by cars, bumping into objects or people, near misses with cars or bikes, and any accidents. Once we have already defined our independent variable and dependent variable, we will need to recruit participants. Recruiting the right participants is crucial for your or our design. Our research participants must be able to represent our target group or end users. Otherwise, your result will not translate into something you can use. Example, The researcher recruits a group of university students ranging from 18 to 30 years old and fill out questionnaires about how often they use mobile devices while walking and how exactly they use them. Pre-screening a sample of participants would yield varying ages, genders, personality, temperament, and mood coming into the study. Let's assume that we will begin with 20 participants on our study, and the 20 participants is called samples. Random assignment. Whereas randomly selecting the sample is not essential in an experiment, randomly assigning participants once they are in the sample is essential. We want the IV groups to be as similar as possible prior to the IV manipulation so that any changes can be attributed to the dependent variable and not the participant characteristics. And there are types of random assignments such as independent groups experiment, also commonly called a between subjects experiment. The IV groups are independent of each other and the participants are randomly assigned to receive one level of the independent variable. Simple random assignment. Each participant has an equal chance of being assigned to any of the IV levels. This can be accomplished by flipping a coin, rolling dice, or any other process that ensures that there is no distinguishable pattern to how participants came to be in the independent variable groups. Stratified random assignment procedure in which the researcher identifies strata of participants based on key characteristics, then uses random assignment so that each member of each stratum has an equal chance of being assigned to any of the IV conditions. Dependent groups experiment. The groups are related to each other. One way they may be related is through matching. Match random assignment involves creating match sets of participants who share characteristics expected to impact the dependent variable. But in our experiment, we use the simple random assignment, which is by flipping a coin. The participants that will get a heads will be on our experimental group, and the participants that will get tails will be on our control group. First group will be our experimental group, which will be exposed to our independent variable, which is using a mobile device while walking, and our second group will be our control group or comparison group, which will not be exposed to our independent variable, which is will not use mobile phone while walking. Identical conditions, keeping everything else the same. The condition of two groups will be the same, such as the place, time, and temperature. Controlling extraneous variables and confounds means that the IV is the only variable that systematically differs between the groups. Any pretest given to one group is given to all groups so that if the pretest impacts the dependent variables, all the groups are affected equally. Once done, we will collect the data, and the data is our dependent variable, which is over the course of the week how many had been honked at by cars, bumping into objects or people, near misses with cars or bikes, and any accidents.
Good day, everyone. I will be discussing how do we manipulate an independent variable. First, I know we all know what an independent variable is. It is the variable that causes a change in another variable, while manipulation in experimental research means to change the independent variable level systematically so that the different groups of participants are exposed to different levels of that variable, or the same group of participants is exposed to different levels at different times. The different levels of an independent variable is called condition. At minimum, an independent variable has two levels, though most experiments have between 2 and 4 levels per independent variable. In relation to conditions, there are two kinds of group. The experimental group, which is used to describe an independent variable condition in which participants receive some level of the independent variable, and the other is control group, which is used to describe an independent variable condition where participants receive none of the independent variable. In our previous example of Adele's song, we could set a condition like a no song or a different song condition. The participants that listen to Adele's song would be our experimental group, while the one that sat in and does not listen to the song, which is our independent variable, would be our control group. It is salient to note that experiments do not always have to have a control group. There are many different ways to manipulate an independent variable. The following categories are designed to help you give some ideas, but these categories do not fully encompass the range of independent variable manipulations that have been used or that might be used. The first one is environmental manipulation. An example of it is changing the temperature or lighting in a room, smiling or frowning at participants. Here, the researchers may use a confederates, the one who work with the researcher but pretending to be participant or bystander. He helped to stage an event that the participants observe or may interact directly with the participants. For scenario manipulation, instead of having a confederate smile or frown at the participants based on which independent variable level they were assigned, a researcher might present the participant with a written scenario, asking the participant to imagine meeting a person for the first time along with a picture of that person, either smiling or frowning. On the other hand, instructional manipulation involves varying the instructions, information, or feedback given to participants. A researcher may tell one group of participants to take notes using paper and pencil, and the other group to use a laptop, perhaps. Or a researcher may tell one group that the task they are about to complete is very difficult, and the other that the task is very easy. Last on our list is the physiological manipulation. This include giving human participants or animal subjects varying levels of alcohol or drugs, physical stimuli such as shocks or a surgical procedure. Although there are many ways to manipulate an independent variable, keep in mind that not all variables can or should be manipulated. When deciding how to manipulate your independent variable, you need to consider those on our screen. Past research and theory can help you demonstrate that your manipulation is not frivolous and help you anticipate and minimize any risk to participants. The strength of the relationship between the independent variable and dependent variable is a major factor in a powerful experiment. Hence, strong manipulation leads to strong effect. However, strong manipulations may be unethical. For instance, in an experiment of drinking coffee and its effects in driving skills, it is not ethical to give a high dose of coffee as this is hazardous to participants' health. Lastly, you can test your manipulation before and after you conduct your study in order to determine if your manipulation has the desired effect and is strong enough for participants to be impacted by it. It is particularly important for scenarios and instructions because it is possible that participants did not read carefully enough to pick up on the manipulation. That's all for manipulation of independent variable. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Today I'm going to discuss how to measure the dependent variable. First, what is a dependent variable? A dependent variable is what changes as a result of the independent variable manipulation in experiment. It's what you're interested in measuring and it depends on your independent variable. In statistics, dependent variables are also called responsible variables. They respond to a change in another variable. To truly understand dependent variable, we first need to know how to tell different between independent and dependent variables. In simplest term, an independent variable is the cause and the dependent variable is the effect. But it can be hard to figure out which is which when you're looking at any sort of study or experiment. For example, on how to identify the independent and dependent variables on the following research question. First, do tomatoes grow fastest under fluorescent, incandescent, or natural light? The independent variables will be the type of light the tomato plant is grown under, and the dependent variable will be the rate of growth of the tomato plant. Another one is the effect of intermittent fasting on blood sugar level. The independent variable is the presence or absence of intermittent fasting, and the dependent variable will be the effect of it, the blood sugar level. In an experiment, a sensitive Debye measure is one that can be detect changes due to the independent variable manipulation. To avoid floor and ceiling effect in your Debye measure, avoid using single item scale with limited response option. For example, a single yes or no question. Instead, use an item that has range of response of options or use a measures that has multiple items that will be combined into a total score. What is a ceiling and floor effect? In ceiling effect, independent variable seem to have no effect only because participant quickly reach the maximum performance level, while the floor effect, the independent variable seems to have no effect only because the task is so difficult that participants cannot perform well. Other threats of internal validity. In research, demand characteristics are cues that might indicate the study aims to participant. These cues can lead participants to change their behaviors or responses based on what they think the research is about. Demand characteristics are problematic because they can be bias your research findings. For example, when asked a series of questions about depression, participants may become wise to the hypothesis that certain treatments may work better in treating mental illness than others. When participants become wise to anticipated results, termed as placebo effect, they may begin to exhibit performance that they believe is expected of them. Making sure that the subjects are not aware of anticipated outcomes, also termed as a blind study because it reduces the possibility of distress. Demand characteristics occurs when the participants try to make sense of the research and act accordingly to support the aim of the research. Demand characteristics are a issue as the participants may behave in a way to support the hypothesis, making the result less valid. You can control demand characteristic by taking a few precautions in your research design and materials. You can use the following measure. 1. Deception. Deception hide the purpose of the study from the participants. Number 2, between group design. It give each participants only one independent variable treatment. Number 3 is the double-blind design. It conceals the assignment of groups from participant and yourself. Number 4, implicit measure. It use indirect or hidden measurement for your variable. Next is the experimenter expectancy effect. This term referring to the unintended effect of experimenters' expectation or hypothesis on result obtained from their research participant. The expectancy effect is when someone expects a given result. The expectation unconsciously affects the report of the expected result. So when a participant expects to have a certain kind of outcome, they will, without realizing it, change their actions and behavior to actually get this exact outcome. For example, on the shown illustration, as you can see, one participant asking a vampire or the researcher if he is going to bite them. And then she said, because if you are, I would like to know how have operationally defined bite. Is it a bite just to drink our blood? Or is it a bite that will turn us into vampires? The vampire was so surprised by the question, and another lady participant telling that maybe we are part of an experiment and he can tell us to which group we've been assigned without biasing his study. The other lady said, does it mean that we're in a no-bite control group? This cartoon reviews several key concepts. One, operational definition are ways in which a research measure or manipulate variables, not telling participant to which condition or group they've been assigned or that there are different conditions is one way to reduce demand characteristic. A control group is a group that receive a zero level of the independent variable. Finally, this cartoon raises ethical issue of manipulation that might harm the participant like what the author said. Hopefully, no researcher even would ever conduct a study that might turn the participant into vampire. And lastly is the diffusion of treatment. It is a situation in which research participants adopt a different intervention from the one they were assigned because they believe the different intervention is more effective. To avoid treatment diffusion, consider placing the control groups and treatment group in different locations. For example, choose two different schools, businesses, or geographic locales. However, care should be taken to ensure that you don't run into other issue of validity.
Good afternoon, everyone. When we are examining causal relationships among variables, we should also check and balance the internal-external validity or determine how sound is our research and design method. Both internal and external validity help determine how meaningful the results of the study are. What are the internal and external validity? Internal validity and external validity are two concepts that reflect whether the results of a research study are trustworthy and meaningful. While internal validity relates to how well a study is conducted, external validity relates to how applicable the findings are to the real world. What are these? Internal validity measure accuracy of the experiment. It typically consists of variables being manipulated and measured. While external validity checks whether the causal relationship discovered in the experiment can be generalized or not. Internal validity is concerned with control of extraneous variable, in which external variables are any variables that you are not intentionally studying in your experiment or test. External validity stresses on the applicability of the outcome of the practical situations. Internal validity describes the degree to which the conclusion is warranted, while external validity ascertains the degree to which the study is warranted to generalize the result to another context. Internal validity identifies the strength of the research method and design. On the other hand, external validity identifies the generality of the research outcomes to the real world, or what happens to the real world. It uses the naturalistic observations in which participants don't know they are being observed. Internal validity either addresses or eliminates the alternative explanation for the result, whereas external validity generalizes the outcome. Findings can be generalized. As a result, a balance between internal and external validity is essential to promote enrollment in this study and confidence in attributing its outcome to an intervention, as well as to provide answers to clinically relevant questions such as who benefits most from which intervention. So, an experimental design is expected to have both internal and external validity. Internal validity is the most important requirement which must be present in an experiment before any inferences about treatment's effects are drawn. To establish internal validity, exchange should be controlled. External validity is the cornerstones of a good experiment. That's all. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So we have already discussed the different features of experimental design. Therefore, it is also noteworthy that we have to discuss or understand the limitations of experimental design. So to better understand, we are presenting to you the advantages as well as the limitations. So, what are the advantages and disadvantages? One advantage is experimental design provides high level of control, and we don't have limit on subject matter or industry involved. So when we say we don't have a high level of control, it means the researchers are able to manipulate their data, the variables. They are able to manipulate their subjects, the population itself. Okay, so researchers are able to eliminate extraneous variables for them to achieve the result they wanted. However, on the flip side, elimination of extraneous variables is not always possible. So if an extraneous variable is not eliminated, it may result or the result may not be as accurate. So another disadvantage or limitation is because of manipulation, your experiment can be unethical. When we say it's unethical, it's not acceptable to the society. It's not of the norm. Okay? Like say for example, you wanted to inject something on people and see what will be the result. What if it will cause death? That's unethical. You're killing people. Okay? Another advantage is experiments can be repeated or replicated. So experimenters or researchers can repeat or can do over their experiments using different sample sizes. So repeating your experiment, having larger sample sizes will give confidence to the public or to your subjects that your result will be better. So you get that internal validity already. And with that, if you have a larger sample size, you can also say that, or you can also generalize that result into the population. However, the limitation or disadvantage of this is it can become costly. Okay, an experiment being repeated over and over can become costly on the part of the researcher. Another disadvantage is on the generalization part. It becomes a disadvantage when it is done in a controlled, super controlled situation. You say that you have this large sample size, but only in a certain situation. What if you flip that situation and or you flip that experiment and do it in a different situation? Say for example, you are doing it in a simulation. You put it outside into the real world. Will it work? Will your experiment work? Right. So if we are only focusing on the internal validity rather than the external validity, so we set aside external validity, then that's a disadvantage on part of an experiment. Okay, your experiment may not be useful or may not be accurate in another situation or in another world. So that's all for our topic on the experimental design. So we have actually included certain questions to test our knowledge on this topic, on our topic. So if you get time, you can have a look at these questions. Go back to our lesson. Go back to the topic and try to answer the questions based on your how you understand the topic. So have a nice day. Thank you.